I now have to debate which part of the painting I'm going to work on next. Obviously, well, not obviously, I do it in pieces. And so, some pieces get done right away. I could work into here and get some of these dark places. But my students have been wanting to find out what happens with this deer. And one of the advantages of doing the deer now is that it's going to tell me how this is going to balance with that. Because one of the reasons we wanted to put this deer in here was we needed something down in this corner to balance the weight of all of this that's painted off to the left. And these little islands back here are going to be part of the balance as well. So I'm going to have to be thinking about how they're going to balance out. But let's work on the deer first, and then if I've got time, I'll work on these guys a little bit. I'm doing this in little pieces this time, so it's getting spread out a little longer than some of my other demos. So let's go ahead and work on the deer. So what I need to think about is, remember, we took this photograph from another source and I turned it around and the lighting is backwards on that deer. So I came in with my colored pencils and did a little bit more darkening on this upper side here to remind myself that that's not the light side. This is the light side. I put a little white pencil on there. Couldn't quite get it as light as I needed it, but we are looking pretty good right now, and I just need to remember that, and that's the hardest part, is remembering that I'm changing it. And so hopefully I've got enough marking on there to remind myself to do it properly. And as you might remember when we were talking before, that I'm using the shadows that I see on these rocks to tell me how to do the light on the deer. So there's a little rim light I'm seeing on these rocks, and I'm seeing that they're dark on this side, that there's a real rim light that would be up there, and then maybe some light across that haunch. And maybe a little bit on here if the light's coming around enough on that side. So it's always a little bit difficult, and possibly I should think about whether to do that lighting on the rocks sort of simultaneously. I probably should. Now, as far as the color for this deer, it is a gray brown, and in the lighter places underneath, it actually gets almost tan, and you're going to get a little bit of bounce light off that water coming under his belly. So it will be a little bit lighter underneath of there, just not as bright light as what it had been for the other picture. Okay, so let's start with a little bit lighter brown. I can start with my burnt sienna, and because this isn't going to be a real bright, and I'm actually seeing in those lightest areas in there, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to that. Quin gold, let's put the quin gold on it. Yeah, a little bit yellower brown for those lighter areas. And then his body is a real gray brown, and so our sort of standard ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, I think it's going to make a nice gray brown. A little bit more brown in there so he's not quite so dull gray. And scrap of paper. That looks pretty good. And then get this rag up here. Oops. Need this rag so I can control the water on my brush. Get a little bit of my other color. So that lighter color that's coming in underneath of there is going to be about like that. Those feel pretty good. Now, as I'm doing this, I need to be thinking about where it's going to stay very light. This is a hard one because I'm looking at the photograph thinking, okay, I'm going to follow that photograph, but I'm not really going to be following that photograph. I am going to be, okay, let's just get a little bit of this underneath here. And I want to leave a little light on the back side of his leg because that's where it is going to be shining through. And then, you know, it's a little lighter inside. Now his ears, they're likely to have a little highlight on those edges. So let's think about how that highlight on those edges might work. And then it's going to be darker. It's going to be darker across his face here. But there's going to be some light coming in on the far side, that underside of the face. And just put a little dark through the center of that. This is going to be dark up here on this haunch. And light up, he's got a highlight around the back of his butt. It might be a little lighter in through here on this little haunch. That comes onto that leg. Always get this a little bit darker. Gotta be careful where my head is. I want to get right in on close on this, and I can't tell. If I had a camera person, they could tell me to get away from it, but I don't. So I just have to remind myself that I've got to pull back and stand a little further back from this, which is not my natural way to paint. My natural way to paint is to get my little head right in there. Okay, so that's light all around the back side of there. I can come in after this dries and do even more dark. And that sunlight, that sunlight comes down into here. I'm going to say it's not going to get more than just a little rim on his face there. And that's dark there. It's going to be a little darker on the front of that leg and down into there. A little darker on the front of that leg. He's looking pretty good. Now, I'm going to need to soften the edge of this just a little bit because he's round. He's not square. And so this edge needs to have a soft edge to it. So I'm rinsed my brush, dried it 3/4 of the way, and I'm coming in with a damp brush and just picking up the edge of this. I don't want to lose all that light over there. I just want to do this a little bit on the edge so that that's a softer line. Now when it comes down into his legs, they're so small that they're not going to look real round, and they might actually like having a little hard edge on there. And I've left a little hard edge around his ears. Now, the beach, you know, the beach is the same kind of color. I'm going to use that same color for that beach. And remember, he's white on the back edge of that leg. Now, oh, you know what I'm forgetting? Well, doesn't matter. We won't do it. I won't have, I'm thinking of the light that's on those rocks, and that I actually have to leave some light behind on some of these rocks. And let's just do some more here, and maybe another one down in there. I can come in and do the dark side of those rocks really easy, but I need to leave that light side. Just leaving some rocks. And let's just pick a couple back out of here. I'm seeing that they're very dark, and so the first thought was, oh, I'll just put them in dark, but no, I can't because I have to have their light side as well. And then maybe there's some rocks. Leave some more rocks behind. It's a pretty rocky little beach. So I'm making them relatively straight on the bottom because they're sort of settled into the sand, and then they've got a rounded top to them. So, and then a few of them sort of stand up. Some of them are just tiny pieces. So that intersection into the water, we're going to be playing with that a little bit more too. And now that I'm seeing this, I'm thinking this water needs to come over this way a little further. It's not that way in the picture, but it just feels like it needed it. It felt too steep there. So I'm just painting the lightest color of that beach that I see. I'll come back and do those shadows later, but we just want that sort of light tanny color. And find its way around some of these rocks. Letting my brush sort of wander its way through what feels like rocks to me. I think we're doing fairly successfully here. That water, it's interesting. Careful, I don't get this too dark. I'm just putting, you can see through the water at this point to the sandy beach down below. And so you can actually see a little bit of this brown color. And that's why I'm painting a very pale, thin piece of brown in here. And I need to be careful not to make it too dark. Yet as it gets down in here, there's quite a bit of it actually. And I'm doing it sort of in these little circles because what I'm seeing is that assuming that this deer has sort of stopped to drink. Got to be careful about getting it too dark. Rinsed my brush, came in with the damp brush and picked a little bit of paint back off. But when the deer reaches down to drink, he disturbs the water surface and a little ripple of a circle goes out from that. And so, but it's not a straight circle, it's an oblong. You can see it right here, this little oval shape. And there's another one back there. So that's what I'm trying to paint here. And then as it gets further away, it becomes these sort of concentric circles out that way. And there's actually quite a few colors in here, but I don't want to get too into all of those. And do I want to dry brush some of this on here? And a little bit of this brown as well. Got to be careful that I don't get this too dark. I want that blue still to show, and we will be going darker on some of this, but I just want to get this feeling of that water. Now, is this dried enough? Yeah, I think it's dried enough. We can come in with this darker color, and let's make this even a little darker now. I'm going to need it a little darker on his body, and I'm going to need it a little darker on the rocks. So and then it runs down his head and over the top of that eye. And because there is a little bit of bounce light, and now instead of it being light inside of this ear, I'm going to say it's dark inside of here. And same with this ear. Okay. And there's a little bounce light, so the darkest place is going to be not at the edge, but back in just a little bit. And let's see here. That run down that leg. Just a wee bit darker right in there. No white spots, please. And then grade this at the back so that that goes back into that haunch. And then there's shadows running off of this, so the shadows tell us which way it goes. And we'll find the dark side of some of these rocks, and we'll throw shadows off of them. And there's a couple out in the water. And if they're in the water, they're not throwing shadows. Maybe a little bit of this sand can go a little darker there. So now we've got a pretty active little piece here. Oh, too dark. Just dry brush a little bit of blue in on here to make some darker spaces. There. Just wanted to get a couple of places that were darker to make some of that stand out more. And let's do a little more blue. can go on to the shadow side of the leg and then stay light where we've got some light in there. And maybe this can go a little bit darker back behind him here. Just a thin blue to make that a little tiny bit darker, so that the value difference between the light on his bottom and the light out in the water is similar. And then I'm going to just dry brush a little bit with this blue here. Still sort of, that's a little too much. Spread it around more, Margaret. Okay, I'll have to come in with my damp brush and pick that off a little bit. It's a little too dark. So, you know, at this point where the water is close to us, things come in a little bit of circles and some diagonals. As it gets further away from us, as we get more and more out into here, it's going to flatten out and become more and more like the horizon. But in this area, it is following the water, those ripples in the water, and so we see them working their way across through here. And right at the intersection where the water hits the land, there's a light on the water and there's dark on the land, just a tiny little line of it. In some places, you know, it's very, very small. And these shadows, now that this is dried, I need to actually come back in and make the rock a little bit darker than the shadow so that it looks natural. Here, rocking underneath of there. Tip of his nose is dark. His eye. Now there has to be a highlight in that eye, so I have to be careful not to paint every last little bit of that. There, that looks pretty good. So there's a little bit of a highlight on that backside where the sun would be coming in. And it's a little more almond shaped. So let me see if I can do this with this brush. That's going to do it. Just leave it alone, Margaret. How much do we do here? Because we're reinventing some things, and I don't want to sort of reinvent it all wrong. Okay, I think I should leave him alone, although now I'm feeling like his little hooves need just a little tie down to the ground. There we go. Step away from this, decide whether there's something else that needs to be, and yes, I am feeling like this needs a little more darkness in there. Okay, I'll probably be doing some more work in the water down in here, and let's this dry brush stuff here. This is careful not to get it too dark, but there is a darkness to it. And I think this is all going to have to go darker over here eventually. This whole corner back here is going to need to be a little darker and sort of more olive. So I'm now getting into this thing of my brush marks being either horizontal or vertical, so that I can get that feeling of the water coming down into there. Okay. It just felt like I needed to tie this in just a little bit more. There's more work that I've got to do down in there, but I think I need to now stop. So we now have the deer. And with the deer in, we can see our balance a little better. And then we'll be building this up a little bit more, getting some more detail in there, getting this a little bit darker, getting some of this area right in here a little bit darker. But remember, we were also feeling like we didn't want to overdo that. So I do have to be a little careful what I do.